Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Olaolu Ogunyemi. He's a proud U.S. Marine officer, award winning author, and a passionate leadership mentor who's on a mission to build strong leaders from the boardroom to the living room, at work and at home. He's the founder of Parent Child Connect. He's the author of the award winning children's book, Crow from the Shadow, and the upcoming book, Lead Last, which challenges leaders to care more about service than recognition. So, Lou, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing well, Mark. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited for today's conversation.
Well, so am I. And thank you for taking time out of a busy, I'm sure, work life schedule to join us here today. There's a lot to talk about, including leadership, your lessons learned, your books. But as we always do here, as you're expecting, here's the main question: what's your favorite mistake?
Yeah, so people like me have a lot of mistakes, but my
Uh,
favorite mistake, I believe, was in the workplace as a Marine, is just trying to be somebody I wasn't. And
mhm,
at one point, I was just trying to be a good operations officer and executive officer. And I remember my mentor pulled me in and told me, "Hey, did you realize that Marine over there is crying because of your interactions with her?" And my reaction, of course, was not one of what you expect, which is one of like humility. My immediate reaction was, "Oh, why are you telling me that?" And he's like, "Because you are making another Marine cry with your leadership style." And I remember looking at him like, "Okay, we're Marines, and that's what Marines do. I'm your operations officer. I'm here to make this company run smoothly, and I'm your executive officer. I'm here to keep these junior officers in line. So why are you asking me or talking to me about making a Marine cry?" And it's
mhm,
funny because it was amazing that mentor of mine and at the company commander at the time, he truly was patient with me and hearing me out.
mhm,
Because my big mistake in this whole story was that I was trying to be what I thought was the best version of an operations officer instead of being
mhm,
myself. And that's my mentor came back and told me, is like,
mhm,
yeah, people are starting to respond to you because you're telling them, and that's how the Marine Corps operates and many organizations operate. You say it, I do it, but they're not doing it because they are achieving the self-discipline that we want them to achieve and do the things even though we're not around and supervising. So that will be my biggest mistake, or excuse me, my favorite
mhm,
mistake. I learned to be myself in any environment, and I learned the importance of getting to know people and knowing how to best lead
mhm.
them.
That's powerful. And I appreciate you for sharing that. I think we can kind of dig into the story a little bit. I mean, you're making me think of A League of Their Own, and there's no crying in baseball. Similar thoughts about no crying in the Marine Corps.
Yep, that's exactly what I was, at least in my mind. First,
Yeah.
I mean, it's within the first 2 years of me joining. And so I have a little bit of a misunderstanding of what it meant to be a Marine and be, tough as nails and all those kind of things that, quite frankly, I got from movies, not from knowing a Marine myself. And so that was just my
Mm.
perspective.
So it's interesting that you say, yeah, that perspective came from movies. That's not, I guess, in hindsight, that's not what was really being modeled for you in those first 2 years.
Not at all. What the Marine Corps modeled for me, the leaders that I had, they modeled that there's a time for everything. There's a
Mhm,
time for a leader to understand how their emotions are being portrayed, which is something they told us all the time. Like if you're in front of your formation, understand that if you are showing emotion, it needs to be intentional. And that emotion that you're giving, whether it's happiness, sadness, disappointment, whatever it is, the way you're reacting to a scenario has to be intentional because you can either intentionally or unintentionally lead your Marines in a certain direction based upon your emotions. So they really teach emotional control, not
mhm.
necessarily emotion suppression.
And that seems like such an important distinction, and something that would apply to leaders in so many different settings. I mean, when you talk about a time and a place for everything, there probably is a bit of a time to be a stereotypical movie drill sergeant, for to yell or to correct somebody in that sort of way.
Oh yeah, and that's one of the things that I didn't know the difference. Right.
Mhm,
So using that scenario where I'm talking to this, which happened to be one of my rank peers, although I had the higher billet, when I'm talking to this individual, it didn't matter what it was. I'm just coming in. It's like, hey, well, this is what I saw. I mean, when I came into the the Fleet Marine Force, I remember one of my first interactions with an operations officer and executive officer was me standing on the other side of the table and watching him completely annihilate another lieutenant who just checked in with me or who was there. And I was like, okay, maybe this is how they do it, and honestly,
Yeah.
the entry level training that we had, that's the way that they show leadership. And so in my mind, this is the leadership model. No matter what's going on, I'm being very firm, very direct. And if you seem like you're stepping out of line in any shape, if you're asking questions or anything like that, it's time for me to get you back in line. And that's not necessarily what they were trying to teach. It's just what I learned from early training.
Mhm. And, in that story that you tell, you think of the role of a mentor. Not everybody is blessed to have a mentor, yet alone a mentor who can step in a key moment where, the situation was still ongoing. Could you talk a little bit more about what you learned through that about being mentored and being a mentor?
Oh, absolutely. And that was one of the feedbacks I gave one of my new commanders that showed up right before I left that unit. I told him that that mentorship in that moment was key for my entire career. I knew it from that moment that that was a key insight that he had just given me. And really it was because there's two sides. Number one, he was willing and bold enough to come to me and tell me, hey, you're wrong. And that's one of the
Mhm,
things I believe that sometimes we lose when we're starting to talk about soft skills, we start talking about empathy, emotional control, and all these other topics, we start to forget that there's a simple yet profound idea, and it's really just accountability and holding people
mhm,
accountable and being bold enough to tell them, hey, that's right or that's wrong. And that's one thing that
mhm,
he was able to do. And then on the other side, I was blessed because I realized that, okay, this man is not just in charge of me, but he is stepping in as my mentor. And so I understand that I have to receive his feedback. I have to be humble enough
mhm,
to understand what he's saying and say that if he's coming and using his own time, he's already taken
mhm,
his time to sit down and he even leveled with me. He wasn't trying to say that, hey, I am the captain, you're the lieutenant, and this is what I'm saying you're going to do. Instead, he said, hey, I'm just going to talk to you just as a man to man. And he had that conversation with me. And I was humble enough to not only respect him for his rank, but respect him as a man. And I think that really is what
mhm.
helped this mentorship early on and has really continued throughout my career. I try to find people who can help me grow and develop. And in turn, I try to help other people grow and develop.
Yeah, and, I have no military experience of my own. I'm thankful to you for doing this and serving your country and serving others. The whole idea of, this formal rank and hierarchy, it exists in other industries. It exists in medicine. You have formal organizational hierarchy, you have informal kind of professional hierarchy. And how would you describe the military hierarchy to those of us who haven't served and haven't experienced that? We hear the phrase that must have military roots, pulling rank and getting in trouble for that. Could you share a little bit more about finding that balance of yes, there is hierarchy, but as you described, that coaching was man to man. It wasn't listen to me because I'm your superior officer. Could you just tell us more about that dynamic?
Yeah, and I'll say that first of all, that's unique to the individual. So they,
Yeah.
what we're taught coming into the Marine Corps, no matter whether you go to, the recruit training for enlisted Marines or you go to officer candidate school, really the only three things that you need to learn is yes, sir, no, sir, and aye, sir. Those are three
Uh,
things you need to learn. Uh,
what's the difference? Yes and I.
exactly. Really no difference. You're just saying, I'm going to carry out the order
Uh,
that you just gave me. And that's really what it's about. So, and when you start thinking about that, it's like, okay, if I understand that if this person outranks me, then they have really from the Constitution, they have the right to now tell me what to do. That's in
mhm,
line with the Constitution. That's in line with the Uniform Code of Military Justice. All those documents and things that we really support and we exist to defend. That's what tells them that they have authority over me, and that's what tells me that they have authority over me. And so that's
yeah.
where it starts for us. It's knowing that you always have somebody who's over you and has authority over you. And that hierarchy is extremely important for many reasons. Number one of them being when you're in a combat scenario, it's not time for democracy yet. It is time to have somebody in charge and they're leading well. So that way you can all go in the same direction. And so that's where really how the military hierarchy came about. Now, what we started learning, and I learned in this moment very early in my career from this mentor, is that there's a way to do it to where you don't always have to flash your rank. And in fact, you very seldom should be having to flash your rank because people will now respect you for the person that you are. And that's what he was doing in that moment. What he was doing is not telling me that, hey, I'm a captain and you will listen to me, although he could have very well said that. But what
Mhm.
he realized is that I wouldn't have learned anything in that moment. All I would have done is just comply with his orders. And I would have not I've done my best to not make that individual cry anymore, but I wouldn't have started thinking about what do I need to do to
Mhm.
be a better leader? And that's what he was doing. He was finding
Yeah.
ways to not choose his rank to give me an order. He was using his influence over me, which in this case was given by his position of authority. He was using his
Mhm.
influence to really coach and develop me. And I believe that's really the difference between the leaders in the Marine Corps who know how to use their influence well and those who just use the rank.
Well, it sounds like the way he treated you helped you reflect and learn, is what I hear you saying. Like, if you tell somebody to do something and they do it, you might accomplish something in the short term, but you haven't helped that person grow. So, like in the private sector, companies like Toyota and others that are learning from them, there's common expressions that I think would relate and resonate with you really strongly. The idea of getting things done through developing people, that you shortcut the person's learning and the organization's learning if, as a leader, you give them the answer as opposed to challenging them to figure it out by themselves. That what you're saying reminds me very much of that private sector leadership notion that at least some companies try to practice.
Oh yeah, and my very short time with Tyson Foods, that's one thing I learned from the CEO there. His name was Donnie Smith at the time, and I always thought it was impressive that as an intern and then a new hire, we would all go into a room and he would say the answers in the room, and that moment there really was shocking to me because I'm sitting here
Mhm.
thinking about, okay, I've read articles about this guy. His salary, I think his bonus at the time was like almost $5 million. That's
Yeah,
bonus alone, not his salary. And I was like, bro, this guy is in the same room as me, just a couple of rows up, looking at everybody and saying, "Hey, the answer's in the room," which is giving the impression that, I may have an idea what I think the right answer is,
sure,
but I want
sure.
your feedback and I want you to tell me what you think. And I truly believe that's why the company was thriving at that
Mhm.
time. I don't know what they're doing now, so I can't speak on that. But at the
Sure.
time that I was there, I just remember the company having the best years in the history. And I believe it's because that CEO was willing to do exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think these parallels are interesting because I think good leadership is good leadership. These behaviors and the mindsets, right? So some CEOs think they have to have all the answers, or they think they do have all the answers, right? There could be the ego, or the organization is one where it's seen as a sign of weakness if you don't pretend to have the answer, that it's a sign of weakness if you're asking your employees, when I think we're on the same page that that's good leadership and it leads to better results. I see you nodding. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. And that's why I believe that when you look across the reading list for all organizations, so I've read the Army reading list, Air Force, I've read the Marine Corps, of course, the Commandant's reading list. And every time I look at those reading lists, it's full of leadership from across the industries. That's not just Marine Corps leadership.
Yeah.
Of course, there's historical battles and things that we need to study, we have to be familiar with because we should be technical experts in the job, the industry that we have. But they also talk a lot about leaderships. You see the Simon Sinek's, you see Brene Brown, you see all these other leaders across the industries that have written books and given us ideas of things that we should know. And so I think that's one of the reasons that the Marine Corps realized that a leader is a leader, no matter where you are. We may be in a different industry, but the practical advice and the characteristics that a leader must have transcends industries.
Yeah. And another thing you said, it's just I'm going to reflect back again from the private sector at the risk of someone who sings, extols the praises of Toyota, maybe a little too much. They're not a perfect company, but they have a great culture. And one phrase that's burned in my mind, it comes from somebody, Gary Convis, who started his career at General Motors. That's where I started my career, at least for 2 years. So he knew what that old, more authority based model was. Do it because I said so. And he learned from Toyota as he teaches others, this phrase, lead as if you have no authority. And I think the as if is important. He's not saying we don't have authority, but it sounds exactly what, it reminds me of what you were sharing. There's a time and a place to use that authority, but if you're using it all the time, it probably leads to suboptimal results.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love that because when I was studying Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, I
Yeah.
learned the same thing. He grew up in Microsoft, and I thought that was impressive that, when you start reading and studying Microsoft over the years, especially in the 90s when he was there, it was really a dog eat dog world, which is what you're describing. It's like
Mhm.
everybody is trying to make it, which is normal for many organizations that
Yeah.
everybody's trying to promote, they're trying to go higher, and basically they're starting to undercut each other. So it's cool to read about Satya Nadella and hear from people at Microsoft to know that he truly believes in empathy. He truly believes in understanding people and helping people grow and develop. Some
Mhm.
of which I believe he learned those soft skills from his own family. And I think that was one of the things as I was studying him that I thought was impressive that he spent time saying that, I learned empathy through my son, who was, I believe, with special needs. And he learned how to grow. He watched his wife who nurtured her son and their son, and they sort of grew together. So that's a perfect example of what you're describing right now. And I love, again, learning from industries and
Yeah.
leaders who do it well.
Yeah, and those of us outside the military often love learning from military examples. So in our, if you will, our private sector reading list coming from the Army, Team of Teen, Stanley McChrystal has been, a very popular book. And this idea, at least as I understood it, and I worked with somebody who had retired from Army medicine and was now working in the private sector. And even before McChrystal's book, this guy Jim would explain, like you were saying, Lou, about situational circumstances of, if it's a matter of life or death, you must do what I say. But he was talking about, in non-combat settings that people need to understand the reasons why they're doing something so they can internalize it, so they are more willing or likely to do it. And, McChrystal, the one takeaway to me was this idea of commander's intent. I'm going to set direction because of authority, but I don't know exactly what needs to be done to execute. Like, what are your perspectives on that idea of commander's intent and what we can learn from that?
No, you're spot on. And that's exactly what my company commander at the time, my mentor, was trying to teach me that, yes, if I could stand over somebody and tell them what to do all the time, then they probably will succeed at doing that until I'm not around. And that's really all about just
Yeah.
commander's intent does help them to understand how to accomplish a mission. But I really think it helps us when we're talking about the word discipline, for example, and what is self-discipline. So I've already started to study that word because, we throw it around in the Marine Corps. In fact, that's like one of
Mhm.
the first speeches that you get when you're at boot camp.
Uh,
It talks about discipline is the hallmark of a Marine. And we're talking about how we're going to help the recruits achieve discipline. But when I started thinking about what that word means, I had to break it down into its most rare form, or its root form, which is disciplina, which is talking about discipleship. And it's talking about a teacher and a pupil who are together learning. And really, the idea is that teacher teaches that pupil so well that that pupil begins to apply those teachings in their own time, own way. And that's really what Commander's Intent is talking about and why it exists. It's helping people understand that, hey, I may be the teacher and I may be instructing you, but really my intent is for you to be able to carry on those lessons whether I'm around or not. And so really General McChrystal and a lot of different officers, especially when we're coming in, this things that we're studying to understand how to give a well thought out intent and to
uh-huh.
ensure that people can operate within your guidance. And then more
Yeah.
importantly, almost more importantly, is not just the intent, but having a feedback mechanism so people know that people are able to receive the information and then say that, hey, I didn't understand your intent or I did understand your intent. And here's
Mhm.
how I operated underneath your intent. And that gives you the ability to refine your intent and go back and tell them, hey, either A, yes, this is what I meant, but let's
Mhm.
refine in this way, or B, that was not my intent at all. So let's make sure I communicate it more clearly. So commander's
Yeah.
intent is huge in what we do in the Marine Corps and the
Yeah.
DoD in general.
Yeah, and one other story I'm gonna share back at you from Jim, the coming from the Army background. You said something very similar to the way he put it. He was saying, because this hospital laboratory was a 24/7 operation, and he was generally there on day shifts. He would stay into night shift, and the way he put it was, if people are only following standard operating procedures because they fear getting in trouble. He's like, that doesn't scale well because I can't be here 24/7. He would pop in on night shift, not to play gotcha, but because you got to be there to talk to your people and show support for them. But I thought that was really powerful of saying, well, this can't be a fear-based, authority-based approach to discipline. Understanding why we do things and making it easy for people to do the right thing allows for that self-discipline.
Oh yeah, and that's one thing. When I was a company commander on Recruit Depot, and that's training recruits. So you're processing through thousands of recruits every year. But I remember having a conversation with my drill instructors, and it almost shocked them because I heard a lot of talk about, I want them to be scared of me. I want them to think about my name. They get to the fleet, they're like, man, I would never want to talk to that guy. But I
Yeah.
was like, hey guys, I don't believe in fear-based leadership. I think fear-based leadership is not going to give us the kind of confident and strong
Hmm.
Marine that we're looking for.
Hmm.
In this case, if we're telling him, trying to tell a Marine that we're going to discipline you through fear, or we're going to make you accomplish the mission through fear, then what you're saying is spot on. It's that you
Hmm.
have to be around in order for them to actually accomplish the mission. Whereas
Yeah.
I thought is more important to give them a reason to do what you're telling them to do. And in many cases, that's getting them to believe in the mission, getting them to believe in the
Mhm.
vision of what you're saying. And so we're at Recruit Depot, for example, these people who are just fresh coming into the Marine Corps, that's the perfect opportunity to mold them and tell them about the history, tell them what they're becoming a part of and why they're becoming a part of this. And what I noticed is after I continued to coach my drill instructors and tell them, hey, here's the way that we need to do it. Here's the way. Of course, there are some that are going to be like, no, that's not what I want to do. But then I
Mhm.
saw the most effective ones were the ones who didn't use their sheer presence just to scare the recruits or the Marines.
Mhm.
What they decided to do is if they had a presence, they would talk about, hey, man, you see how I look? This is what a Marine looks like. This is the standard we hold ourselves to. And then you see recruits that are now more inclined to train themselves. They're more inclined to eat. They want to eat the right thing. Although you're very controlling what they're eating, they want to
Mhm.
eat better. They want to drink better because now they aspire to be like that drill instructor. And instead of them being scared of that human being, now they aspire to be that human being. And I think that was just
Mhm.
more inspirational to get them to do what we wanted them to do.
Yeah, yeah, that is inspiring. I wanted to ask also, let's talk about the upcoming book,
Mhm.
Leading Last, and, what do you mean by that phrase?
Yeah. So the first thing I mean by that is that there are things that we have to do before we're able to be effective leaders.
Mm,
In this case, what I offer is the first thing that we should do is get to know ourselves. And that's where the book is. It's in three parts. The first part is who are you? And that's really taking time to understand what our insecurities are, understanding what all the things that we've had deep down inside of us that cause us to react or make decisions. Just try to get to know that, more of an introspective look. And then the second thing is get to know the people you're leading.
mhm,
Because a lot of times I think we take these positions and we just run with them, and we don't truly know who we're leading. And then the last part is how are you creating an environment for them to grow and develop? And really,
mm,
that's what I talk about. That's what lead last means. How are you doing these things? How are you learning about yourself and the people you lead before you consider yourself an effective leader? And of course, if you do it the right way, you're also finding ways to create a leadership that lasts well beyond your tenure, whether you're in the Marine Corps or the military like us, where we rotate basically every 2 to 3 years, or you're with the organization and you want to rise through the teams and go ahead and become whatever corporate CEO of whatever you want to do. It's really finding ways to ensure that your leadership lasts beyond your tenure in the position that you're in.
there's a couple different meanings there about the last,
Mhm.
right? Understanding yourself and your people before jumping into lead and then doing it in a way that's lasting. It's a good phrase. That's a clever, structure, good title. So you mentioned insecurity. I know that's something that you write about. What's what are the most common ways insecurity shows up in leaders who think they're confident or even want to portray that they're confident?
The first thing I would say is frustration, easily frustrated. Because one thing, and I can speak for myself, one thing that I realized is before I learned my insecurities, I can find myself being extremely upset with people based upon whatever they're saying, the feedback that they're giving me, whether positive or negative. I found myself being upset with the negative feedback, and with the positive feedback, I found myself trying to shrink away from it. Like, oh, that's not me. I don't want, and what I started realizing is that a lot of the things, the way I was reacting to people's feedback in this example, was based upon me thinking that these people were challenging my position. Now, where did that come from? Why would I think somebody's challenging my position or challenging my authority if they're just trying to tell me, hey, this isn't the way that it's done, or here's a better way to do it? Well, you have to go back to potentially my competition with my brothers. When I'm well, trying to butt heads with them growing up, or perhaps during that time and all that competition, there was some unhealthy competition where we were undercutting each other to get ahead. And just how brothers grew up. That's how we grew up in our household. Love them to death, but that's just how we
Yeah.
grew up. And
Yeah.
then some, as you start thinking about that, it's like, well, why am I reacting this way? It's, oh, well, now I have control. And now they have to do what I say
Mm.
until they come back and say something and challenge the thing, challenge your idea. And now you're like, well, it was a great idea. Why are you challenging it? Well, perhaps there's a better idea. And so that was the first thing I had to learn, that those insecurities reveal themselves in a lot of us. A lot of times they're based on just things that we grew up with and things that we never addressed, and then perhaps we just try to, especially as men, we try
Yeah.
to put it in back of our heads and try to push past it until you see that emotional response or reaction that you don't necessarily recognize or even like.
Yeah. And those are a lot of really interesting examples and more subtle examples. The one that comes to mind that might be prevalent or easy to see. In my experience, I've found people tend to overcompensate for some deep rooted insecurities, and that leads to them either being, really braggadocious, or it seems like they like, well, if somebody seems really full of themselves, that seems like it's often a mask or a compensation for different insecurities. I imagine you've run across that. How to help coach somebody through that? They might not want to admit they have insecurities, right?
Yeah, that's very tough because especially for those who are very proud, if they're overcompensating. In many cases, they have a very strong personality. So walking up to them and telling them they have an insecurity is probably not going to be the most effective manner.
A
Uh,
direct well, yeah.
right, the direct route's just not going to work that well. The way I've done it, dealing or talking with people, is I take it away, take them out of their environment. So one thing I always recommend for people, especially when we're deployed, is to sit down over a bowl of cereal. And the reason I use a bowl of cereal, and this is any example you can think of, is because it's something that usually we flash back to our childhood. Because
Mhm.
most adults don't eat Fruit Loops or anything that I know of, and so
Yeah.
you just sort of flash back for a little bit. It's like you're putting yourself back in the mental state of a more adolescent mental state, and perhaps then you're helping them to let their guards down because now you're just in a mood where you're sort of happy. You're feeding that deep desire for to be satiated by, in this case, some very sugary content that most of us sort of look past now in our life. We try to, but in this case, now you're letting everybody's guard down, and now you're having a conversation about whatever it is. And the way I've introduced it in the past is I'll just bring it up, hey man, you seem to feel very offended by X that happened. Or in this case, like you were in a meeting and somebody said something and then you just sort of came over top. And every time somebody tried to say something, you were over talking them. What do you think about that? And how do you think that was perceived? And then you continue to eat your bowl of cereal and just listen to them. And
Yeah.
it's in the first interaction is going to be very defensive. But the more you
Mhm.
have an opportunity to talk to them and help them break that defense down, then you'll be able to help to provide feedback in some ways. But again, I wouldn't imagine trying to directly address it, but I would say that you do have to find a way to address the problem and not necessarily attack the person that's sitting in front of you.
Yeah. So when it comes to kids, how do you teach kids about insecurity and to coach them through that?
So the best thing that I've thought of is number one, use the things that they're interested in, especially if they're young. Pick up a book. Obviously an advocate for reading books. I love reading, and I believe I got that from my mom. My mom was very involved when it came to reading to us, very animated in every book that she read with us, and it's just one of the things that I think I picked up, and it helps us out because books have a wide amount of themes. And sometimes when you're just having a silly moment with the children, for us, it was Dr. Seuss. For my kids, it's all kinds of, I mean, it's very wide, but that's a perfect opportunity to talk to them about those themes in the book. There's always a character that has some kind of problem in the book, and then you just sit down and have a conversation with them. And then that's when you can sort of bring up the idea of insecurities is you can sort of, again, in this case, let their guards down, help them let their guards down by just bringing up books and things that they enjoy. As they get older, they may sort of navigate away from books. I know I did, especially in my early teen years, because I felt like it was a chore for my dad. And so, as a teenage boy, I felt like I needed to rebel. I don't know why, but I felt like I did. And so sometimes it may be just, when you're sitting down with them, if you can game with them. I'm not a huge gamer, but if they enjoy gaming, maybe sit down and talk about a game. If they play sports, use that as an opportunity. If you see an example of something happening, somebody acting out of their insecurities, perhaps sit down and talk to them, not gossip, but sit down and talk to them about what they saw so they can work through that. But these are some of the things you can do. Just use the things that are in their world, their normal occurrences, and just get into their world and talk to them about these topics, just like insecurity.
So when it comes to leading last, how does that look different at home than it does at work?
I think it looks different in that you can use home as your sandbox, to use a IT term.
Mm,
And when I
mhm,
say that, for those who don't know what a sandbox is, it's in IT, if you are developing a product, say like software or application, you always have a separate sandbox that you test this in. It's an environment where it's testing, where it can break and it's not going to impact the actual organization. And that's what I think the home does for us. It allows us the opportunity to truly try all these leadership tactics and things with people who are very forgiving of us. And
right,
the benefit is they get to see the true, authentic version of us, because a lot of times we may leave the workplace, or sorry, leave the house and try to put on a mask and try to pretend to be somebody we're not. But when you
mhm.
get home, you're sort of exhausted, and you get to be the version of yourself that people may not see when you leave the house. So that's a perfect time to truly get to improve your leadership by just being the raw version of yourself and just trying things out. And once you see if it works as you work with children, then it may work with adults as you go into the workplace, because people are people. It's all about getting to know them and adapting to their needs and giving them what they need to succeed. So
Mhm.
that's probably the biggest thing I'll say. It is different in that you're being more authentic. You're being probably a more raw version of yourself at home,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
it's also an opportunity to practice and sharpen your leadership skills.
Thinking back to your favorite mistake story, I think there's a connection of where you talked about being the leader you thought you should be versus being the person you are. Yeah, hopefully at home you get to be the person you are. And, you're thinking about, well, the husband I should be, the father I should be. Hopefully that's authentically lined up with who you actually are.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why that's also my favorite mistake, because I'm a repeat offender. I was a very, very young father. So I graduated college. I was married at 22 with a 3-year old. So I started out
Yeah.
very early in my parenting. And so one of the things I very quickly realized is I learned a leadership style. And this goes back to know yourself. I learned a leadership style for how my parents were leading me growing up. Now, me versus my oldest daughter, completely different human beings. I was very mischievous. I was acting out. I used to hang with the wrong crowd. There's a lot of things that I was doing where it was wrong. And so my parents had to be more direct for in my life. They had to be, sometimes I wouldn't even acknowledge what they're saying until they
Mhm.
raised their voice. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I know they're serious. Whereas with
Yeah.
my daughter, I tried that same leadership style and I would recognize that, oh, wait, that's not what she needs. That's not the kind of person she is. And oh, yeah, when I raised my voice at her, especially at a young age, man, she just broke. It wasn't like a thing of her understanding of being like, okay, now I hear you. She was thinking, well, I already heard you the first time. And now I feel like you're mad and you now severed the connection between us. It's a weird dynamic. So I will say that favorite mistake it is a lesson I learned about not just being yourself,
Mhm.
understanding that, yes, you learned from your parents, and your parents, they did some wonderful things. My parents were wonderful in my life and definitely who made me who I am today. But I also understand that there are things that they did to lead me and coach us and guide us that won't necessarily apply with my oldest daughter. And that's really what
Mhm.
I had to learn from that version of my favorite mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. And that phrase you used about a parent raising their voice, they're serious. You're giving me another flashback to, 30 years ago in that General Motors environment. There was so much yelling and screaming and cursing. And I remember one of the plant leaders giving some of us young engineers, I guess they thought they were coaching us and said, basically, yeah, you've got to yell and curse, otherwise they don't think you're serious. And I'm like, well, that's one way. And it felt more like emotional dysregulation in
Mhm.
practice than getting intentionally angry. That was my read on it. Because they were just always, almost always in that mode, as opposed to what you were saying about picking and choosing a moment.
Oh, yeah. And that's one thing that we learned. We know that humans are different. That's just one of the things we know. We all have similarities, but we all are different. We have different perspectives. We have different way of thinking and viewing life. But for some reason, we still think that a one size fits all approach to leadership is adequate. And it's just not, it's inadequate. And so saying that, for example, that, yelling and cursing is a way for people to think you're serious, perhaps that works for 1 out of 10 people. And then
Yeah.
the next person there may be like, well, I'm yelling, all that does is frustrate me and it reduces my productivity. Another person may be like, your yelling is just annoying, dog. That's nagging. I'm gonna keep doing my job, but
Yeah.
it's just annoying. I wish you'd go away. And the next person may just straight up leave. So you have all
Right.
these different personalities that come with leadership. But
Mhm.
we just have to remember that there's no one size fits all, and especially for our young leaders. That was what I learned in the first 2 years, luckily with mentors. So for those who are watching and listening, hopefully if you're a young leader, you're picking up on if you try that one size fits all approach to
Mhm.
leadership, even if you study leadership books, shoot, I just told you I'm bringing out a leadership book here soon,
Yeah.
but you still have to take that and apply it in context of your life. Otherwise, it won't be effective.
Yeah. And I'm one of the people who left left that behind. I had the opportunity, thankfully. So, previous book, the children's book, Crow from the Shadow. What's one lesson from the book that adults need as much as kids?
Yeah, so for Crow from the Shadow, the biggest lesson I would say for adults is that the inner
Mhm.
critic is oftentimes wrong. And I say that because the book Crow from the Shadow is just talking about no matter who you are or where you're from, you have the ability to control your own destiny and control your own fate. And what we see in the book Crow from the Shadow is there's this unlikely hero, which is a crow, who's
Mhm.
just going through life and being told that he shouldn't do things that he enjoys doing, or that's wrong because it's not the shadow's way. And those are the kind
Mhm.
of things that we're projecting through the book, and we want adults to sit down with children and explain to them. But even as adults, as we read that story, we realize there are a lot of limiting beliefs that we assume for ourselves because we just listen to other people say it. We listen to other people say, because you're from here, you will do X. In my story, back where I'm from, they talk a lot about statistics. And that was one of the things that I remember growing up. And it's almost like our minds at times, sometimes unintentionally, but it was happening, we're being conditioned to say that look to your left, look to your right. One of you three aren't going to make it. And it's like, well, why would you be conditioning my mind to say that? I get that you're trying to teach statistics, but I want you to understand that you're now conditioning my mind to think that one of us is not going to make it. So either A, I'm just going to work my butt off to assure it's not me, or B, I'm just going to point to somebody else and say, okay, that's going to be him. I'm not going to connect with him or try to lead him or work with him. I'm going to move on about myself. So it's really just understanding what beliefs that we've adopted over years, maybe unintentionally, and just knowing that we truly can control our own fate and our own destiny.
Mm. Mm. So, as we wrap up, Lou, maybe just two final questions. Kind of closing the loop on your experiences as a Marine officer. You said you didn't expect to become a Marine. Why, tell us a little bit about why you say that and how you ended up in this path.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, again, because I was a bit insecure myself and I was just struggling with my own identity, I was just hanging out with the wrong crowd. All right. And,
Yeah.
and luckily, my parents and I had some mentors out there, and a bunch of people were knocking me across the head and saying, hey, brother, it's not the right
Mhm.
way. That's why I can testify that they are the reason I'm here today. So that's a big reason that I became a Marine, is because I had people who, when I left the tracks, they would knock me back on track real quickly.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is I loved the idea of being a Marine. I loved the idea of service. And I even was in Army drill team. But
Mhm.
I thought that Marine Corps or the military general was a last resort. That's what I was told. And that's where the book Crew from the Shadow comes in from being a personal story for me. It's because I was being told that that's a last resort. You shouldn't do this. All these other stereotypes that come with being a Marine. And I was like, well, I just want to do it then. And then I finally got to college and I'm like, yes, I'm gonna do whatever I want. I'm a sophomore in college, or I just finished my sophomore year. I'm like, you know what? Nobody can stop me from joining the Marine Corps. I'm a grown man, and so I decided to join the Marine Corps. So
Wow.
that's really how I ended up doing it. I just took control of
Mm.
my own life.
And boy, what's the Marine Corps? You bring they get the raw material of a rebellious young man. I guess well, they have a way of molding you, right?
100%. And that's what I always tell people. I was like, I rebelled to get into the Marine Corps, which sounds ridiculous, right? So Marine Corps is definitely not an organization who likes people who rebel against the system. But yeah, that's how they found me. They recruited me somehow and truly
Yeah.
did make me better than I was when I joined.
Yeah, and thinking back to your mentor, there in your favorite mistake story, or whether it's parents or mentors as a kid, someone's got to love you enough, respect you enough to say, "Hey, you can do better."
Oh yeah. And that
That's
that's what it
real
is.
meanings.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you're right. This is meaningful. That's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry to step on you there. So before we wrap up, tell us about Parent Child Connect.
Yeah, so Parent Child Connect was designed for adults to sit down with children and help create teachable and memorable experiences. That's really what Parent Child Connect's all about. It's not allowing children to be influenced by the world around them, the information they receive at their fingertips, without us being a part of it. So I always tell adults, parents especially, that we have so many influences, our children have so many influences, and our job is either to collaborate with them or combat them. But we cannot stand on the sidelines, because stand on the sidelines means that we're collaborating with them and allowing our children to be led by only God knows what going into their
Mhm.
phones or to their ears at school or whatever's happening. So that's what Parent Child Connect is. It provides resources to parents, teachers, mentors, and caregivers to help them create those teachable experiences.
Well, I encourage everyone to go learn more about that. There will be all kinds of links in the show notes to Parent Child Connect, to the books. I look forward to your book coming out, Lou. So, again, our guest today, Olaolu Ogunyemi. I really glad that we could meet and have conversation here today on the show. Thanks for sharing your favorite mistake story and your reflections and all these hard fought lessons learned. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks.